way. So next up is Angie Liu and Amanda Cluis. Uh, is mental illness a lack of faith? Um, we have a tendency of stigmatizing mental illness as a deficiency in faith, and it oversimplifies the challenges faced by those afflicted and may deter them from seeking the help they need. It is essential to approach mental health with compassion and understanding, recognizing that faith can coexist with mental illness and that both spiritual and professional support can play a vital role in recovery and well-being. But before we go into our next workshop, I would like to ask you, please, 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 there is a QR code right there. If you can please donate to Compass Ministries to keep helping us to support missionary care in the field and when they come back home. So without further ado, here is Angie Liu and Amanda Cluis.
Welcome, everyone, to the Compass Ministries online conference. We are hosting a series of workshops on the topics of mental health and missions, and we're so happy that you joined us today. Compass Ministries is a nonprofit organization based in the Tampa Bay area that provides services to missionaries and their families before they go overseas, while they're overseas, and long after they return. We focus on coaching and counseling, debriefing, and online groups, in-person groups. We have a residential program here in Florida. So we offer a variety of services. And if you're interested in any of these services, you can reach out to us at compass-ministries.net. And today we're going to have a conversation about a very important topic to me that has to do with mental health. And so today, myself and Anchi Liu, we're going to be leading this discussion. My name is Amanda Cluis, and I'm the clinical director at Compass Ministries. I'm a licensed mental health counselor and former missionary. And Anchi Liu, why don't you tell us about yourself?
Sure. Thank you, Amanda. Hello, everyone. My name is Anchi. I'm currently working with Compass Ministry as the Root House house manager. It's a missionary kids housing program. And also, I'm also doing counseling for missionaries with Compass as well. I'm currently a Florida registered mental health counselor intern. So some of the background about me, I was born and raised in Taiwan. I came to the States back in 2016 to study for my master's in mental health counseling. Got my degree in 2018, and I started working in the field. When COVID hit in 2020, I actually went back to Taiwan, and God had a little bit different plan for me. So I started working as a neurofeedback technician, which I do brain training for people who actually are struggling with mental health illness. So I'm really happy to be able to present this topic today. I think that, as Amanda mentioned, mental health or mental illness is such a, if I can use the word, controversial topic among Christian community. I think that there's definitely so many different reasons for it, but the goal for this workshop is not to define what mental illness is. It's more about to start a conversation to help either organizations, churches, and even just you yourself to think about what's your perspective towards mental illness. And as a Christian, how can we view this topic differently?
Well, I'm excited to dive into it, Anchi. So the question today is mental illness a lack of faith? And this is going to be a start to a conversation. We're not going to finish the conversation, but I want to implore all of our listeners to come with an open mind, and we'll learn together on this important topic that affects not just missionaries in the missions community, but Christians as a whole and non-Christians. And so I think that this is a very pertinent topic to our culture today. So is mental illness a lack of faith? But Angie, why don't we start with some of the myths that people might be coming to the seminar and already be dealing with. So the first one is cultural, feeling ashamed about suffering with a mental illness. There's a lot of embarrassment and shame that around the topic of mental health. And so a lot of people are afraid to even have the conversation we're having today because they're embarrassed. They for a variety of reasons, they might feel like they're not strong enough. They need to be stronger. So Angie, tell us a little bit about what you think about this myth.
Yeah. So when I first trying to organize all this presentation, the first myth that came to my mind was definitely from my own cultural background. Back then in Taiwan, the church I grew up with, of course, we didn't have as much information about mental health as what we have right now. So when people talk about how they're feeling, what they're struggling with, they're always being encouraged by praying more about it, have more faith. So I remember growing up, listening to all this comment, I was like, okay, so does that mean that we have to try harder in order to fight against these feelings? Of course, now learning all about mental illness and mental health, I know that there are some of them, they are not really fightable, like you cannot really fight against it. Um, and also just to know that, in some culture, including my own cultural background, it's very shame-based. So a lot of people, after getting those type of feedback, they think that, whoa, that means I'm not being a good enough Christian. So that feeling of ashamed might also prevent them from getting more help, even to reach out more to ask for help. So I think that we have to approach this type of situation differently, especially as organization or churches. Instead of providing them more direct advice, I think that would be better for us to listen first and see what's really going on. Because I personally believe that for whoever who's struggling with it, they thought about it and they tried. And then when they reach out, that means that they're maybe already lacking resource and lacking support. Yeah, so now I am in the Western culture, right? And doing counseling for missionaries who are basically like Americans. I'm pretty surprised and shocked to find out that this is still pretty much the same as how I experienced in my own culture. So I just came to realize that this might not even just be cultural, even though I put cultural here, but I just want to point out that there are some scenarios happen. It's beyond cultural. Among all the clients I have met, a lot of them, they question about that. They don't feel safe and comfortable to bring this topic up with their organizations or even their Christian community or their even churches.
And I've noticed here in the American culture, at least with the young people, because mental health issues are so prevalent, they're really trying to grow an awareness and also normalizing the fact that a lot of people struggle and there are resources out there for people to get help. So we don't want anybody to hold back from getting help because they're feeling ashamed or embarrassed, no matter what culture you're from. And some cultures have a more difficult time with this and have higher barriers. But for our listeners, we want to encourage those who are struggling to not be embarrassed, but to seek out help if you're having a struggle. So that leads us to our second myth that is quite prevalent in our Christian communities, a sin or a weak faith. So Anchi, why don't you tell us about this one?
Yeah, I think it kind of goes the same line with the previous one. But it's going beyond that because it's more about how you value yourself in this situation. So a very common thing that we talk about feelings, right? We will quote unquote saying that you should not be anxious and there's enough worry for tomorrow. So we all heard about those verses. However, there's also some indication saying that, oh, you're lacking joy, you're lacking faith in this situation, and you should not feel this way. And if you pray more about it, this will go away. There's a very interesting research I came across when I was doing this presentation is done by Webb and others from 2017, indicates that for a lot of Christian circles, they consider their spiritual condition is a reflection. They consider their mental health or mental illness condition is a reflection of their spiritual condition. So that means that if their relationship with God is, like in a very difficult situation right now, they probably think that their mental health is not in a good place. I think that it's very true in that because when we are lacking hope, lacking faith, we will feel more prone to feeling certain way, very negative. We probably don't want to seek out for more help. However, that connection of like my relationship with God and how I see myself in this will also add more stressor when you're already not feeling well. So I think that we need to be careful in putting more association in that, which I think that's very truthful. But instead of us overthinking about like, is it because of me? Is it because of my lack of faith that caused my mental illness? I think it's better for us to consult with other people that we trust and then ask for the community for help.
And part of our discussion today is going to be realizing that there's no one answer for every person. For one person, this could be a spiritual issue where their faith is weak and they need to develop more of the fruits of the spirit and trust in the Lord to deal with their anxiety and taking every thought captive. That may be true for some people, but that is not true for all people. And for others, there's chemical imbalances or trauma. And so we need to be aware not to jump to conclusions, whether it's a problem in ourselves or in somebody else, that we're not just throwing this myth on them. Well, it's a sin issue or a weak faith issue. No, there are many examples we have in scriptures of people who had strong faith, but yet still struggled. I think of Job, a man of God, faithful, had so many struggles, lost his children, lost all his animals, his livelihood, and was depressed. But yet he was faithful. So his was not a sin issue. And there's others. We have an example of Jonah. He was really angry at God and he wanted to die. He was so angry that he wanted to die. That would be called a mental health issue in our day and age. But for him, it was a relationship with God issue. He was really struggling with God's will for his life and for the people of Nineveh. So we have some examples where we have people of strong faith who are struggling and people who are just having a struggle in their relationship with God. So we have to be aware that this is one way mental health can present itself, but it's not true for everybody.
Yeah, and I just want to add that a lot of people associate, you know, a good mental health with joy and happiness. But Christian joy is not just happiness. It is not us pretending to be positive and ignore the negativity, right? It's to learn how to still be grateful, learn how to still rely on the Lord while we're in a very different circumstances. So I think that perception will change a lot of how you view your own struggle when you think that way, instead of just simply saying, I have to be grateful, I have to just be happy and be positive, which is very easy to say, but we all know that's very difficult to do.
Absolutely. Great point. All right. Next myth. This is a tricky one. Myths about mental illness in the Christian community. Demon possession. Is there any room to consider demon possession in relation to mental health?
Absolutely. In Eastern culture, we've seen a lot of demon possession, and even I would say in some religious believing, especially in Taiwanese culture, we even ask people to be the vessel for demon possession in order to reveal something they were asking for. So of course, people do not view it that way. I don't think that's demon possession, but the form of it is, because they're asking some random spirit to, take host on this person in order to, answer their questions or ask whoever who's, asking for this to help them to solve some problem. So I personally believe that demon possession is everywhere, and it just, show up in different forms. It's not just what we saw on the movie, like how it's Hollywood version of demon possession. It can be in different forms. However, I think we just have to be careful here is that for demon possession, there are some certain behaviors, certain things that you see that can also be very similar to some of the mental illness symptoms. So, for example, a very common thing is, hallucination. Hallucination is you hear something, like some voices, and the people will describe to you, like, I hear someone told me to do some things, or I saw something, which is very common in people with schizophrenia, bipolar disorder. But if you just look at a symptom, you might think that is this person possessed, or is this person, is something darkness inside of them. So it's very tricky that we have to be careful how we interpret demon possession, because there's a lot of things that overlap with what we call nowadays is called psychotic break
Mm.
or mental health crisis.
Mm-hmm. And I know there can be some cultural differences here. In my
Yeah.
experience in the US, not witnessing a lot of demon possession, and that's not necessarily from an American perspective the first go-to as far as if someone's having a mental health struggle. That's usually not what we consider first, but in other cultures, sometimes that is more prevalent. Like I spent time in Kenya, I
Mm.
witnessed somebody who was demon possessed. There was no other explanation
Mm.
for it. But you're right. Some of these things present as mental health illness. So, um, sometimes it can be demon possession situation. Sometimes it's not, like you were saying. These can be mental health illnesses that are presenting with hearing voices or acting in erratic ways.
Yeah.
Even dissociative identity disorder can
Mm-hmm.
be misconstrued as demon possession. So it is a possibility that needs to be prayed through and considered from this with a spiritual lens, but not all mental health issues are demon possession.
Exactly. I really agree with Amanda. So it's more about thinking about other possibility, not denying the fact that this is demon possession. It might be both. We
Mhm.
just have to be careful how we make this conclusion.
Right, right. Okay, and then the next myth that we'd like to discuss is God punishing me when I'm struggling with
Mm.
a mental illness? This is a tough one. So what are your thoughts on this, Anji?
Yeah, I think this one is like definitely associates with what we talked about earlier, weak faith, right?
Mhm.
I think it's very, I mean, I grew up in a culture where I'm really prone to think about this. I would think about, is it because, I did something in the past or even way before I became a Christian
Mhm.
that caused me to suffer or struggle with certain things I'm having right now, right? However, I was reminded by um, what Jesus did in Exodus, I think God would bring us to the wilderness or even to the desert to test us towards his faith, but he is still going to provide. He
Mhm.
is not going to leave us there without food, without water, without water. In Exodus, what he did was he told people to go to a certain place. He still provided food and water, right? He still provide, but
Mhm.
there's certain rules he wants people to follow and test out their faith.
Mhm.
So I personally don't think that punishment is the right word for it. You might feel like it because it goes against your will.
Mhm.
However, punishment is, I mean, I think we have to learn how to dissociate God from what we think while we are suffering right now. Because I think in a way that we probably think that, well, he's so powerful enough. So why he did not remove my situation?
Mhm.
Why is he punishing me? So that became the conclusion, like whatever I'm suffering right now, he's the reason.
Mhm.
I think that's a very, very dangerous place to go to. And like Amanda mentioned earlier, your mental illness or your emotional struggles, it might just be a reflection of what you're going through right now. It might not be because of God, but because we know that is the ultimate powerful God that we believe in. So it's easier for us to go there and be like,
Mhm.
because of me, yeah, I did something. Maybe because of my thought,
Mhm.
the other day. So this is the result of my wrongdoing. Okay, I deserve it.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And it leads me to think about, natural consequences for choices and decisions we make. If somebody's an addict and as a result, they lose relationships, they lose their family, they lose their house,
Yeah.
they have no money, those are natural consequences for a certain path. And that's not necessarily God punishing. So that is something to consider that, you know, can be going on. The other aspect that I think is important to note is this that as believers, we're told to expect suffering. Sometimes we think
Mm-hmm.
like, oh, if I follow God, things will go well for me, but that's not what Jesus says. He says, you are going to experience suffering, but take heart and don't be afraid because I'm with you.
Yeah.
So it's not necessarily that God's punishing us, but that
Mm-hmm.
we have to endure suffering. Even Paul had a thorn in his side. Do we know? I don't think we know if it was a mental health illness or a
Yeah.
physical ailment. We're not sure. What we know is that he was suffering and God didn't take it away. It wasn't a punishment. It was, something he had to grow through. So that's
Mm-hmm.
that's always could be an option for us to consider when we're thinking through mental health issues.
Yeah, I think that's a good reminder for all of us because I personally, when I first encountered Christ, I also thought that was my path to heaven. And by that means, I feel like, oh, if I trust in him, I will have a healthy, happy, you know, I don't have to worry about anything, that type of life. Oh well, I learned my lesson was not the case. Not saying like I blame God for things happening in my life, but I think this is definitely something that we have to constantly reminding us of is like it doesn't guarantee us a lottery,
Mm.
but it guaranteeing us a sense of comfort and security.
Yes. And that
Yeah.
Christ's peace will be with us even in the midst of struggles and trials.
Yes.
Yeah, great point, Anchi.
Yeah. So to summarize what we just, mentioned about those several myths about mental illness in the Christian community, I know that there must be still a lot like in the community that I did not put in there. But the point is just to let whoever is struggling with this to know that you're not alone, that we hurt you, and there are some reason behind that, and we all agree that whether it's demon possession or lack of faith, there's some reason behind those statements. But also, we just wanted to consider that maybe there's another possibility that is mental illness, and we don't want you to miss the opportunity to actually go out and seek for help.
Yes.
So I think it's the time for us to actually talk about. So we talk about myths about mental illness. What exactly is mental illness? So one thing I want to point out about mental illness is that I realize even for me, it's a very normal thing is we know what we know and our logic is based on what we know. So let's say if I don't know too much about mental illness, of course, when I struggle with something, I don't even know that's depression or anxiety. What I know is, in the Bible, it says this and that. So, of course, I'm going to go with that route and start to analyze myself and think what are the solutions based on what I know. Mental illness is such a big topic for most people, believe it or not. They still don't know what mental illness is. They know mental health, but they don't know what mental illness is, right? So it's understandable that when you don't know about this possibility, we usually don't think that way. So we don't have to blame people. We don't have to say, hey, why don't you tell me that is not the option or the possibilities? There's probably that people just don't know about that. And even for you, and usually lack of understanding will lead to fear and avoidance. So let's just talk about mental illness because mental illness is just words. So what's behind that makes you feel like, oh, I'm resistant, I don't want to talk about it, or like, oh, this is such a taboo, I don't want to talk about it. Let's talk about it right now. Yeah. So I want to provide. It's not surprising to me, but it's actually it makes me worry. So according to sorry, I just jumping ahead. According to National Institutes of Health, mental illnesses, they are very common in the States and around the world. So we already know that it's not something surprising. So in 2022, it is estimated that more than 1 in 5 US adults live with a mental illness. So that means that among all the 5 people you encounter, maybe on the road or among your social circle, there are one person is struggling with something. Isn't that crazy? Like 1 in 5. That's a lot of people. They might not show it, you might not even tell. So as Christians, how can we help our brothers and sisters and just to fight against this myth, or even just to support them, right?
Yeah. So one of the things on that topic is that we want to support one another. We want to raise awareness. We want to provide support and normalize the fact that many people are struggling with mental illness. So we need to have these conversations. And, if you're realizing that you're not functioning well, then that's the time to seek out support and we'll guide you through that. But for, licensed folks who are clinically trained, this is the book, the DSM-5, that provides the outline of what mental illnesses are. And there's guidelines in there. And so that's what the professionals follow to define what is mental illness. But for the general population, knowing if you are not functioning well, doing the thing, if something is hindering your daily life, your work, your relationships, your functioning, then you should seek out support, whether it's, spiritual or psychological or from your primary doctor. And we'll get into that more, but you need to get help if you're not functioning well. If something is hindering you and keeping you from growing and reaching your goals, then seek out help and don't be ashamed and embarrassed to do that.
Yeah, thank you for adding that, Amanda. I think it's very important for us to remember that diagnosing process for mental illness is not just something like we feel like it or we think it is it. There's a guideline and there's so many different, like it's already like the sixth or seventh or eighth like addition towards the DSM-5. So like there's a lot of people behind the scene working towards it and to renew it every year so that for the healthcare worker, they will have the most evidence-based and clear information in order to diagnose people. So it's not just a he say, she say situation. There's a guideline. And for us mental health workers, we follow that guideline in order to do our job. Yeah. So let's talk about some contributing factors of mental illness. So there's genetic factors, social, environmental, and spiritual. Talking about genetic, basically says if you know, or you've probably heard from your family talking about your grandparents, grandparents, or even your parents, they have mental illness. That means that it's possibly also in your DNA. It does not mean that you will absolutely get it 100%, but you will have a higher chance of having a certain mental illness around your developmental ages. The second is social factors. We all know that for the first 18 years of your developmental years is very crucial. So that means that, for people, for whoever you have a teenager here at home, that that's very true because their brains like sponges. They're learning everything by, putting themselves there, experiencing or hearing or by just engaging. So even though we cannot really control who they're hanging out with or what kind of environment they're in, but we all know that anxiety is right there. And for a reason, yes, because it's very easy for them to get involved or exposed to something that would cause some damage to their mental health. So social factor for the first 18 years developmental age is very crucial. Environmental stressors that include like addiction, trauma, and violence. This part is a little bit different from the social part because for social factor, it talks mainly for the first 18 years for environmental stressors. There's some mental health diagnosis that you can be diagnosed after you're 18-year-old. So that means that, for example, PTSD. For a lot of people, veterans return from battlefield, PTSD is very common. The reason that they were exposed to high intense situation, trauma, and violence, and that caused them to dissociate, to be depressed, and there's some sleep problem developed, etc. So environmental stressors is also something that definitely will contribute to your mental illness, even though you don't get the DNA of having mental illness running your family. There's still a higher chance if you're exposed to that then you are having mental illness. The last one, and also a very crucial one, is spiritual. So when we talk about spiritual warfare is something that I would personally use a lot because I experienced that before, which I will address that later more in details. But what we mentioned earlier too is that even though we're walking with the Lord, even after 20 years of faith, it doesn't mean that we're not going to get tested. It doesn't say that we're not going to feel confused about who God is or how to redefine our relationship with the Lord, right? So I think these are something that will all contribute to mental illness. However, they are not like determined factors. They are just some possibilities out there that might be why you are experiencing or having mental illness problem.
So Anchi, in my family history, we have some mental health illness. Am I doomed to repeat that and also have the same illness?
That means that you have a higher probability of having mental illness. But if you're aware and you're taking care of yourself and you're, of course, seeking the Lord, I know that there's a less chance that you're going to develop into an actual mental illness.
Yes, that's right. I think
Yeah.
that's important for people to know. These are contributing factors, but they're
Mhm.
not determining factors. So even in my personal life, the fact that we have mental health in our history doesn't mean I'm doomed to follow that same path. But that
Exactly.
awareness is so key. I can take steps to be on guard. I can engage my self-care so that I know that I'm not gonna, fall into that. I'm gonna build supports around me. So that's a
Hmm.
personal example, but also like your environmental example of studying people who have been through war situations. The research is showing some people come out really traumatized and some people come out of the same situation,
Yeah.
and that can do with a person's resilience, a person's genetic makeup, their history leading up to that. So just being in the same traumatic experience doesn't mean both people are going to experience it the same way. So these are contributing factors, not determinal, not they don't determine what's going to happen in your personal life. And even spiritually, I think of, the example of Elijah, like he confronted the prophets of Baal and knocked them all out. And it was such a spiritual high.
Hmm.
And then so quickly after that, he's like, I've had enough, Lord, take my life. He wanted to die. He was in a
Yeah.
suicidal state, which is that's like the other extreme. But that's an example where like, okay, his spiritual walk was so high and then so low. And, that
Hmm.
was what was going on in his specific life. So these are a couple of examples of how these can be contributing factors to a person's mental health state.
Yeah. And then, so I think that it is something that we all need to learn from is it's also kind of myth, which I wish I put that in there, is that we all thought that when we start to follow the Lord, not only everything will be all right, but our relationship will be stable.
Mm.
I don't think that's the case though. We're human beings, we're weak, right? So we are not perfect. So when you hit certain age, you'll have certain problems around that age. Existential crisis, or we call midlife crisis, will happen. That's not only factors, but it's also spiritual factors. How do you redefine who you are? And just to look back your whole life and think about like, oh Lord, like what's left for me, right? So that would also affect your mental health as well. And that's why you see a lot of people after they after they hit their 70s or 80s, it's very easy for them to get depression. Yeah, so that's something to think about. It's not just spiritual, it's also not just environmental, it's both. It's
Mhm.
all of them.
Great point.
Yeah. So, as I mentioned, because I work as neurofeedback technician, so what that means is I help patients or whoever comes to our clinic to do a brain scan to look what happens in your brain and to customize their training program in order to help them to deal with whatever situation they have. It can be their sleep problem, emotional problem, or behavioral problem. Um, so think about your brain like a CPU. It's basically like the core thing for your laptop or computer, right? So it controls your daily function from breathing to concentration. Um, so the thing that determines our brain's functioning is one thing called neurotransmitter. Sorry, I just jumped ahead again. It's called neurotransmitter. And then when neurotransmitter is too low or too high, or we call that imbalance, it will affect some parts of our brain and cause problems. So this is a picture. Um, so on the right side, it shows a healthy functioning person's brain. You can see that the color is very even. The left side, you can see it's pretty colorful. There's red, there's yellow, blue, and that's actually not a good thing because because it tells you which part of your brain is actually, it says deviant on the picture. Let me simplify it. Basically just says that it is above average people's functioning or below. So in this case, especially with people suffer from depression, they usually will see some abnormal activities on their frontal lobe, which is the part where it shows red and yellow color. So with frontal lobe, we all know that it's for thinking and processing. So when we look at people with depression, we understand that that's why they're presenting with overthinking, rumination, those kind of, problem, even information processing. Um, so this is one example about depression. And I know this is a very new information for most people. So Amanda, maybe from a person who look at it at first time, do you have any question you want me to answer so that you can also answer from some audience?
Yeah, so I would imagine people in our audience are grappling with this. So you're saying on brain scans, you can see a difference in the functioning of a person's brain who's depressed versus normal. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, so are there chemical differences in some of the people who are struggling with depression? Like,
Mhm.
is it really a chemical imbalance?
Yes. Sorry, I forgot to mention that. So yeah, so the conclusion is it can be a chemistry problem, and the
Mm,
chemistry problem is what I just mentioned earlier, is for neurotransmitters. So neurotransmitters is the foundation of all the neurons, how they spread out and build bridge to send out information. Um, so we heard about some very common neurotransmitters like serotonin, dopamine, all that kind of stuff. They're all called neurotransmitters. So for people with depression, they mainly lack in serotonin, and that's one of the reasons. Even though it's not the only one, but research has shown that serotonin is one of the things that's lacking in them.
mm,
Even though we cannot see what kind of neurotransmitter is missing from a brain scan, that's probably will be a technology like 1,000 years later. But we can see on the brain scan to show like which part of your brain is having some trouble, connecting with each other. And then that's when they found a pattern of, for example, people with depression, they usually have problems with their frontal lobe, which is where it shows red and yellow.
mm. So in this image, it looks like some parts of the brain are overactive and some are
Mhm.
underactive. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes. So normally our brain function on a daily basis using so many different parts of the brain. It's not just for our frontal lobe. It's basically like a teamwork. Think about our brain, like I just mentioned, like a CPU, right? It's also like a company. You need a head, you need like accounting department, you need someone's working customer service, etc. So take myself example. When I'm talking to Amanda, I'm trying to retrieve information from my brain, thinking about what we just rehearsed, some information, the notes. I have to look at my notes and see what to mention to the audience. So it not only utilize my frontal lobe, it might use other parts where I can retrieve informations and memory. So if you can put a cap on me and just see how my brain, works, you can see different parts lights up. So I will probably also show up some parts like the left side where I have frontal lobe has more activity, but it's not going to be there for long. It's just more like they're moving around because I use different parts of the brain to process my information to determine how I'm going to talk and speak. And then that's very normal. So not saying that the picture on the right will be your brain for the whole day. If that's the case, that means that you're not using your brain. I'm just joking, but I'm just saying that this brain scan is recorded under the condition either when someone is eyes open or eyes closed and they are resting. They are not like actively doing some task, talking to someone, or doing math, or doing some, solving some, like riddles on the newspaper. They're just looking at a screen blank and then let their thought flow. So this is how this is recorded. So that's why they can utilize this data and to compare contrast and see when people are resting, if there are certain parts of their brain still overactivated or deactivated, that means there's something wrong.
Hmm. So if you're saying that we can see with brain scans that for some people who are struggling with depression or anxiety, that it could be a chemical imbalance, does that mean that a chemical might be very helpful for that person? Like taking medicine for some people can be really helpful?
Yeah, because I'm not a doctor, I cannot speak from their perspective, but from what I have learned as a neurofeedback technician, I know that there are certain supplements that's always recommended for people. And even go back to the most basics, I always ask all this like crazy question to my supervisor, and he will always tell me like, tell them to sleep early,
Uh,
tell them to eat more protein, tell them to exercise. I'm like, that's it. It's like, what do you expect? Do you expect me to give like a, like magical question. So it always goes back to the basic. Whatever chemistry or chemical problems you are encountering, it shows that there's something that's lacking in your body. And the source of how we so a lot of things that we eat and put in our body will determine how our brain functions. So that's why nutrition is very important.
Mm.
Yeah.
So as a starting point for somebody who's starting to look into their mental health, realizing that it's not where they want it to be, sounds like a good starting point is get more sleep, eat well, get some exercise. That's a great place for everybody to start,
Yeah.
to start to improve their mental health. And I think that that's accessible for most people. So
Yeah,
something all of us can do. Great.
exactly. So I'm going to show you guys another picture, but instead of depression, this is anxiety. So this picture not only shows you which part of the brain is overactivated, it also tells you like how the whole brain works, like I just mentioned. So this gives you like a visual to see how it looks like. So the whole picture is a person who has severe anxiety. So this person's symptom is insomnia, and really bad temper, and highly agitated. So on the left side, you can see like the two line where it crossed. It shows you where we call a limbic system. A limbic system, think about that as a control center for your feelings and emotions. It is overactivated. And why do I know that? Because the color. The color is a little bit red. You know, the rest is yellow, but that part is a little bit red, right? So you can see and know, okay, so this person, the limbic system is overactivated. So that means that the emotions are high, feelings are high. Maybe this person feels like a mess. Okay, that's understandable. On the right hand, after the computer and the software does its calculation, shows us this picture where you can see there's a lot of like yellow, red lines. They all overlap and you go all across from your front to the middle, right? So what does it mean? So it shows that this brain is working. So we don't have to worry about it, but it's working too hard. You kind of look like, you know, like traffic hours in Tampa, Florida, especially from St. Pete to Tampa. Yeah. So it's very, very busy and crowded. What does that mean to us? That means that, yes, it's working, but it's working too hard. And it's not really working out a solution, if I can just simplify it that way. It means that your brain's function is stuck. So it create a loop, right? So whenever you're thinking one thing, it goes to the same loop, and then it just goes on and on and on and on. So that's why, you know, especially for this person, overthinking is such a big thing. And it also affects this person's attention function and emotional regulation. This person is unable to self-regulate. Breathing does not work for her. When I tell her that think about something else, she always go back to the thing that makes her feel anxious. So this is another example of how mental illness looks like in your brain.
So Anchi, I've never had put the cap on my brain and been through that, but have you actually done this yourself?
Yes, I think my previous coworker is not there. She can testify for me, but I used to go over 60 something sessions because I work there. So it's like we can go through our own training, right, with other coworkers' help. So to be honest, my brain looked like the right side of it too. I did not have any traumatic brain injury. I did not have any structural problem, means that I don't have tumor. I don't have anything growing in my brain. So for most people, it's the same case too. Like most of us, we experience extreme stress and just basically unhealthy lifestyle. And over time, it might make your brain go crazy like this. But it's not because it's your fault. It's because of how you live, how you take care of yourself, and over time you become like this, right? So in a way, you can say to me and to the person who had this brain scan, it's like, yeah, we're really good at thinking, like we're really fast to get into like work and stuff, but it's very hard for us to get out.
Good
Yeah,
point.
so that creates this loop of us getting burnt out. Yeah, so my personal experience is that I went through all of it. I think that there's some different ways for us to deal with mental illness. This is just one of them. But yeah, this is one of the way that was not relying on medication. So that's why a lot of people are like willing to try because
Mhm.
it doesn't have too much side effect.
Right. And so Compass Ministries does not offer brain mapping, but if somebody in our audience was interested, what
Mhm.
would they look for on Google as far as how to get a service like this done?
Yeah. So you can probably just Google keyword neurofeedback on your Google research, or you can go to Psychology Today. You can Google any neurofeedback technician
Mhm.
that's around your area. One thing that needs to be mentioned is that for whoever is practicing this, there needs to be either a doctor or a healthcare worker. So they can be a registered nurse, mental health counselor. So even for me, Amanda, if you want to expand the business in the future, then we can also purchase the device, go through the training, and get our certification. So be careful when you're looking for all these resources. Make sure that they are qualified, your neurofeedback technician provider.
Mhm.
They are trained and certified.
Mm,
Yeah.
good. Okay, so neurofeedback is one option that doesn't involve medicine that can be really helpful for people with mental health illnesses.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So,
Okay. So Amanda, I think I know that this is definitely your strong suit. So I do have a question because I know I have a lot of clients asking this question all the time. So how do I know if I have mental illness? I just, I went through a breakup, for
mhm,
example, and I feel terrible. I'm lacking appetite, cannot sleep for the past 2 weeks.
mhm.
Does that mean I have depression?
That's a great question, Auntie. And it's very normal when we're going through life and circumstances that we're going to have an ebb and flow in our emotions. It's
Mm,
normal to have highs and lows, especially when you go through a difficult situation, a breakup, like in your example, or a traumatic event, or difficulties at work, high stress situations. And so to have a low mood based on difficult circumstances, very normal. And
mm-hmm.
that's what it might be to say I'm feeling depressed, I'm feeling sad, I don't want to go to work, it's hard to get out of bed today, those types of symptoms. And that's normal life. I would say
Mm,
that's the first category, feeling depressed. But the second category is the mental health illness of having clinical depression, where it's a prolonged length of time. And this can be diagnosed by a licensed person or a trained professional. And it's if your depression is really hindering your life, and keeping you from functioning, going to work. So if it's a prolonged period of time where you can't get out of bed, where you can't
mm,
experience joy, where all of your emotions are muted, where you're having thoughts of really wanting to die, then that's more serious. Anybody who's
yeah.
struggling with suicidal thoughts should get help. That's not something that you want to mess around with. If you are feeling suicidal today and you're listening, you need to get help right away, and the people around you need to support you
Mm,
through that, because that's outside of that normal range to feel like you want to die. But within the normal range, that ebb and flow is what we're looking for. Is it within norm, or is it like really lasting a long
yeah.
time, really hindering your relationships, where you don't
Yeah.
have the energy to go out with and interact socially with people? You can no longer go out to church because you don't have the energy. You can't attend work or school because you can't get out of bed. Those would be some of the signs where you're having significant depression and it's really hindering your life. So the
Mm,
one catchphrase, if you're evaluating within yourself, is this really causing a problem in my life? Then it's time to go get help.
mm. So here, Amanda, you're saying that it is affecting your functioning, basically. If you used to be a very social person, but for a very long time, you've been feeling like you don't want to meet with anybody.
Mhm.
If you used to be someone who's good at work, able to concentrate, but for a while, you cannot really concentrate. It's been very hard for you to memorize something that was easy for you. Then that might be some signs that you have to seek for professional help, correct?
Yeah. But any one of those things could be just a different physical problem, like you're going
Yeah.
through menopause or you're going through a physical illness. So it's important to evaluate all of the
Mm,
factors. Another example is if you've lost a loved one and you're grieving, it's very normal to feel depressed. It would
yeah.
be suspect if you weren't feeling depressed when you've lost a loved one. So that's expected and normal. It just becomes problematic if you're not recovering, within a
Mm.
certain frame time, and it's really hindering your life. Um, so those are some of the things to look for.
Thank you, Amanda.
Mhm.
So the next one, how do I know if I have mental illness? Spiritual warfare. We talked about that in the beginning. Um, so I want to share my experience. So before even before, like I have never had any experience regarding spiritual warfare when I was working in Taiwan, which is very interesting because I know Taiwan um is somewhere that we have a lot of spiritual warfare. We have temples everywhere. We also have like churches right next to temple, right next to like a lot of different things.
Mm.
But interestingly, I did not encounter anything like that until I started working here in the US. So my experience was that, well, just to summarize it, I think that especially for organizations or healthcare workers whose passion is to help people with mental illness, or for whoever missionaries going through some difficult stuff, or they are actually in a very um, how would you call that, like very dangerous area, or a culturally like very controversial area, I think it will be easier for us to also be prone to affected by that.
Mm.
So I can give you an example. So one of my work, including me to work with some people who experience lots of trauma and abuse. And I remember that by working with that person, I was working in this safe house, and I encountered some of I call that, I would not call that hallucination, but that's what I thought it was, because I heard someone was talking. I heard someone was giggling, walking, calling my name. I had never experienced that. I was still at school, so I was very terrified. And I did not know if I was the only one who experienced that. And it turns out that it's because the person we're working with, um, she had performed witchcraft.
Mm.
So there's something definitely dark surrounded her that also affect the staff that was working with her.
Mm.
So that's one examples I have with spiritual warfare. So yeah, that became a thing. I realized that it's very easy for us to step into that situation without knowing, because I did not know mental health in general, like mental health care worker. We just step into that warfare like voluntarily, like, oh, yeah, so I think in this situation, it's very easy. If I were not trained to know what is a mental health illness, what is not, I probably would feel like I was going crazy.
Mm.
Yeah.
That's an interesting experience and perspective, Anchi, because when we're talking about mental illness, we need to consider all the possibilities.
Yeah.
Is this a spiritual issue? Is this a physical issue? Is it an emotional issue and a relational issue? There's a wide variety of things that need to be considered. And while we
Mm-hmm.
often want clarity, like, okay, for sure, 100%, this is a spiritual issue, often it's some kind of combination of both, you
Yeah.
know? And so we want to be able to, understand what the different ways mental illness can present itself and the different
Mm-hmm.
contributing factors so that we know what to do about it. But I can assure you, for all of us, we should be praying. We should be firming
Yeah.
up our faith and strengthening it. There's a lot of research that coordinates positive mental health with a strong faith. Not that it's
Mm-hmm.
causal, but that a strong faith supports, good mental health. And so if you think that this is a spiritual issue, then be praying,
Yeah.
be on guard against spiritual attack. I know for me, I haven't had experiences like yours in the US, but when I worked in Kenya, um, I I saw a demon possession situation and it was spiritual
Mm.
warfare, and we had to counter it with prayer and petition before the Lord. So
Mm.
the way you view your mental illness does affect how you're going to deal with it.
Yeah.
As believers, we should be on our knees before the Lord
Mm-hmm.
about any of our struggles, whether it's mental health, physical health, what relational health, all of it. So that's an important starting point. But then there are also a lot of other resources because we don't want to stop at one place. It's often not just a spiritual issue. So why don't you tell us about some of the other resources for caring for mental illness?
Yes. I think that the very first one is definitely the one that we can all do, is to utilize your current resource, your current Christian community by consulting others, Talk to your pastors, your brothers, sisters in Christ, people who you trust, or even when you learn that this person went through something, they share a testimony, go and ask that person what was the process. Because when we're sharing testimony, usually it's very limited time, so they don't get to share all of the things in detail. I personally was the one who's like always interested in knowing about that person's testimony in details, because I want to know how was it for you to be in the process, right? So go to talk to those people. And the reason why reaching out and still be engaging in this community when you are possibly suffering from mental illness is because actually there's research, shows that how your faith will improve the overall well-being and mental health. So it says here, it's a research done back in 2003. It says religious engagement will provide individuals with a sense of belonging, shared beliefs, and social identification, which may be associated with better mental well-being. Yeah. So it's saying that even though you didn't feel like reaching out to the community, but knowing that this is the right thing to do for you to still be engaging with them, seeking help, and even, for advice, it will help you to reduce the possibility of you ending up being very severe and not knowing how to get out.
So consultation is really just asking the people around you that you trust, explaining to them what you're going through and getting their input. Another way that people can access more formal consultation, if you're a missionary family, you can reach out to Compass Ministries for a free consultation with one of our care providers, and we can give you some guidance. Okay, from what you're telling us, this might be some best steps. It may involve continuing with Compass. It may not. It might be a recommendation that you should go see your doctor or get a health checkup. But a consultation is giving you some options and giving you some guidance about what your pathways might be. So that's a good starting point.
Another resource for mental illness is definitely counseling, but it's not only mental health counseling. So Amanda, would you want to talk more about it?
Yes. Okay. So if you've gotten a consultation and somebody has said, and you've come to the conclusion, like, I think I need some more guidance and some counseling would be the next step for me. There's a lot of different types of counseling out there, and it's important that you're aware of what the different types are. Mental health counseling is done by a licensed counselor, which means they've been licensed by the state that they're in. So Anchi and I are both licensed. It involves education. It involves a lot of supervision and training. It involves passing a test. And so that's kind of, that can also be called clinical counseling. Now, Anchi and I are both Christians. So you might find that a mental health counselor might be a Christian counselor because they come from a biblical point of view. So that's what I would call myself, a Christian counselor. But I was trained in mental health counseling, which means the research-based theories of counseling and learning that the background, but also I bring my biblical perspectives. But that's within that. But that's different than biblical counseling. Biblical counseling is our trainings that are out there done by lay folks who have taken trainings. And biblical counseling usually sees mental illness through the lens of it's always a spiritual problem or a sin problem. And so biblical counseling usually encourages the individual to pray more and read their Bible more. So if it's truly a spiritual problem, that can be a helpful approach. However, there are some limitations with biblical counseling that it might not be a spiritual problem. And so that might be outside of their realm. And it's important to note that biblical counseling is not regulated. And so there's not a guarantee about how much training an individual might have. So if you're going to see a biblical counselor, it would be important to do some background checking into what their training is and their experience, or maybe get some referrals. Now, another category of counseling is pastoral counseling. Generally speaking, these are pastors who are within the church setting who also have some counseling skills. Now, it's also not regulated, so they may or may not have gotten formal training. They may or may not have experience, but a lot of pastors end up doing counseling because that's the place where people feel safe to start if they're having a mental health issue. And we do encourage that. If you're having a mental health struggle, start at your church, talk to your pastor, see what they have to say. And then, but then you might need to go and get more help or more professional help with somebody who has more training. So these are some of the options that are out there. There's also coaching, and that can be an option for somebody who wants to help moving forward, but they're not as well trained in mental health issues. So that would be more of like goal setting and things like that. Now, at Compass Ministries, we offer mental health counseling and pastoral counseling. Our pastoral counselors, we want to maintain really high quality. So we make sure that our pastoral counselors have master's degrees in counseling or a related area and experience. And we really want to encourage our pastoral counselors to have cross-cultural experience as well, because we're working with missionaries and their families. So that's our standard, but that's not true for all pastoral counseling. And then at Compass, with our mental health counseling, all of our mental health counselors are licensed by the state, so they have that set amount of training and supervised experience. So it's important to know what's out there and what these different definitions mean, because one of these might suit your needs more appropriately than the other.
Thank you, Amanda, for the extensive introduction for counseling. So I think that all these are good options based on your needs. We definitely think that it's definitely a good choice for you to consider all the above based on your budget. But Compass will be willing to help you with the consultation and what you need. So please reach out to us when you need us. Okay, the next one is a little bit controversial. It's medication. So I personally know that medication treatment, it's not really welcome by a lot of Americans here for some reason. I know that the culture I grew up in, we have very easy access to clinics, hospital, going to see a doctor. So we don't need a primary in order to get referrals. We can go see all the specialists by ourselves. So people trust the doctors a lot. And I grew up knowing like, okay, I need to take what kind of medications for what kind of situation or conditions. However, I know here some people holding really strong against towards medication use. Some people are like, yeah, they just take painkiller for everything. So there's a very extreme spectrum on this topic. But just in general, for mental illness, I think it's a better and a good idea to consult your primary doctor or psychiatrist. You can consult and ask for some options. Some doctors, they actually have, referral resources to the clinic doing neurofeedback. They might have some other resources doing some other type of treatment that is not medical. So I think it always is a good idea to consult them first to see what are some medication treatment, what are some non-medical treatment options. Even just talk to your pastors too to see what are their opinions and perspectives about using medication in your current situation. And again, going back to the basic, even before you start thinking about using medications, right? Maybe you can take a good look at your current lifestyle. Are you taking good care of yourself? That's a very, very basic and fundamental question, because if you're not eating well, you're not taking enough rest or enough sleep. Sleep is very, very important. If you're sleeping only like 2-3 hours per day and hoping that you can still get good performance in memory, concentration, it's highly very impossible for you to still achieve that efficiency. So go back to the basics, reevaluate what your current lifestyle is and to see where you're at, and maybe just try changing those things. Try to do more self-care, have a more regular nighttime routine, and maybe even morning routine or regular exercise, and see how that changes your body and how that changes your brain too. So yeah, I think medication is one of the options, but it's not the only options unless you're being advised by the doctor and unless it's something that is very, very serious or severe.
So just to summarize, some people really benefit from medication when they've tried the other avenues of help of self-care. And if they're not finding results, then we want to encourage people to consider all the options that might be helpful for them, but definitely consider medication under the authorization of a physician or a psychiatrist. A psychiatrist is a medical doctor who specializes in medications for mental health illnesses. So that's the top of the line if you're having questions about medication options. But like Anchi is saying, start first with eating well, sleeping well, getting some exercise, then reach out for consultation from somebody you trust. And if you need more help, then seek out a counselor, the type of counselor that you might need, or talk to your physician if medication is a good option, or if neurofeedback might be an option. Talk to your spiritual mentors to firm up your spiritual faith. So lots of options as we're talking about mental health. You want to consider your situation from all points of view. But just like a physical illness, you would attack it from all sorts of directions. You would get more sleep and eat well, but you would also consider medication if it's necessary. So keeping in mind mental health is similar in that way to physical health.
Yes.
And my main encouragement, if you're struggling, get help. You don't need to continue struggling by yourself.
Yeah. So before we end today's workshop, I'd like to leave several things for the audience to think about. The first one is definitely to reflect on this topic, to see your viewer perspective on mental illness. How do you think about counseling, even medication treatment? I want to encourage you guys to think more about how your growing up environment, your upbringing, your church, what did they teach you about all these topics? Because mental illness, it might be a new concept for a lot of people, but mental health is definitely not a new concept. Mental health is very, very important for you, even for your spiritual health and vice versa, right? So I want you guys to continue thinking about all of these things, thinking about why do I feel like, for example, strongly against this or very hesitant to talk about this? Why is that, right? There's no judgment there, but just to think about if I do have some resistance, what can I do to know more about this topic instead of just saying no to all of this? Because you might not be able to. I mean, you probably don't know like when will be the next time that maybe you have a brother or sister in Christ that they suffer from something, and maybe you know some information you can share with them or encourage them to, right? Another thing we want to leave to you guys is like what Amanda just mentioned. Always remember to seek support. One of the things that I learned from my journey with the Lord with my mental health is that I know the demon wants to isolate you from the Lord. He wants to keep you in the darkness. One of the things to continue keep you in the overthinking or all of the things that you suffer is to just by putting yourself into this isolated place and you and the voice alone. If you can remember that even though you don't feel like doing it, but continue seeking support from the community, from people who you trust in professional help, you'll be able to find a way and the Lord will guide your way. But you have to step out in order to do that. Yeah. So I just want to leave that to all the audience today. And I hope that this will help, care member or people who help to care missionaries or who's like passionate about doing this to even start this conversation to others and to help them to know that we're here to support you. We're not here to judge you, but let's find a way that align with our faith, but also that can care for your mental health.
Well, thank you, Anchi. You've done a great job presenting us with these options. And again, we're just starting the conversation on mental health, but we're so thankful that you joined us. And for those missionaries and missionary families in the audience, if you're struggling with your mental health, please reach out to Compass Ministries. We have coaching, counseling, debriefings, counseling intensives, lots of services available for you. And so thank you for joining us today and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you for having me, Amanda.
You're welcome. Thanks, Anchi.
Thank you, Anchi and Amanda, for your workshop. It's really interesting. I've come across a lot of unnecessary pain and suffering when we stigmatize mental health issues and disorders. And I have compassion for those who are struggling. And in some pockets of our Christian community, and I think it's really just the lack of understanding when we cast mental health or mental illness as a lack of faith. And it's really damaging when we do that. And it's putting more shame on people. And what happens a lot is that when people are in shame and embarrassed, they don't seek the help that they need. So I hope this has been very helpful to you all. I know it's helpful to me. I especially love the brain scan. I love neuroscience, and it's not a conflict to our spirituality. It's not a conflict in our faith. Science just confirms a lot of what God already speaks in Scripture. So thank you again, Angie and Amanda, for preparing that workshop. And you guys did a lot of hard work. And if you have questions, if you want more information, if you want to talk to Amanda or Angie, just put it in the chat and or put your email address, and we can surely connect.